All right, everybody, come on in, grab a virtual seat. And hello, everybody, and welcome to another presentation of the online ColdFusion Meetup. I'm Charlie Earhart, and I'll be your host for the next hour or so. And in this edition of the Meetup, our 296th, being recorded on Thursday, June 9th, 2022 at noon U.S. Eastern Time, we've got Gavin Pickin back offering another variant of his recent talks. And this one is, when should I use third-party libraries versus rolling my own? And Gavin had stepped away for just a moment. There you go. And he's back. And that's just perfect timing. And there you go, Gavin. I just finished the introduction, so you can take it away. And welcome.
Okay. Thanks, everybody. Thanks, Charlie. Okay. Share my screen.
There you go.
Very cool. Okay. So let me get this other thing out of the way. When should I use third-party libraries versus roll my own? It's online CF Meetup. Obviously, dates are just so everyone who doesn't know where they're at. So who am I? I'm a software consultant for Order Solutions. I work with ColdBox, CommandBox, box every single day, and I do some stuff outside the box too. Working with ColdFusion for 22, it's probably 23, 24 years now, a long time. Been working with JavaScript for just as long, probably longer. I love learning. I love sharing my lessons learned, hoping to make your life easier by, not having to face that pain yourself. I am from New Zealand. I live in Bakersfield, California. I've been here almost half my life to Sunday. I think Sunday's half my life in America. So I do talk funny, but it's getting weaker all the time. I've got a loving wife, lots of kids, countless critters, and I'm available on Twitter under gpickin, ordersolutions.com. You'll see me everywhere and anywhere, and I'll show you a little bit more about that. So that's my ugly mug there on the Modernize or Die podcast, the CFML News Edition. So we've done 151 episodes already and counting, and every week we try and give you updates on news, releases to different engines and updates. Webinars like this one, meetups, workshops, conferences, jobs, blog posts, videos, tweets, basically anything and everything going on in the community. So we try and share that out. We still have stuff on CFCast. So I've been working on this Publisher First ForgeBox package, and you might have realized that some of the talks I've been doing lately on the online CF Meetup are related to packages and keeping your code dry and third-party libraries, and it's all sort of related there. So we've got lots of content on there. A lot of it is free. This whole series is free. We also have our VS Code hint tip trick of the week and the ForgeBox module of the week that we have on the podcast as little snippets there too. So lots of content there. And it's not on the website yet, but I will be speaking at Adobe Developer Week in July. So July 18th, I think my session is. And I'll be talking about building Spark, Android, and Windows apps with Vue.js and ColdFusion APIs. So go register for free for that. There's going to be a lot of great speakers, a lot of great content there. And then Into the Box 2022, September 6th through 8th in Houston. Basically, I'll be there as well. Obviously, I'm speaking. I'll be doing some video stuff, podcast stuff. I'm running a workshop, lots and lots of stuff there. So pretty good. Okay. Oh, Dan, you're right. The podcast one did have you in the middle of something, but so a little bit more information about Into the Box. So early bird prices until June 31st, 2-track conference, lots and lots of great content. My workshop is that Vue.js SPA and mobile app with REST APIs, which is a little different than what I'm doing at Adobe Developer Week. And then we got some surprise announcements coming next week, so check that out. Be pretty cool. And CF Summit 2022, I will be there. Will I be speaking? Maybe. We'll see if they pick me or not. So we'll see about that. But we'll be there. Some of the Orders people will be there, and we'll be doing our own workshops after the conference too. So lots of different places to see me. And if Charlie agrees, I've got a few more online CF meetups I'd like to do as well. Okay. So why should I use third-party libraries versus roll my own? So like most things, there are always pros and cons, right? And so that's what I'm going to try and do in this session. But usually the best answer is usually related to moderation. You want to make sure that you have make the best decision you can for you and at the time. That's really important because the best decision for you may not be the best decision for somebody else. And then another thing is, do not blindly follow the crowd. If they jump off a cliff, would you? And we'll tell a couple stories during the session, and maybe that'll make a little more sense. So, okay. So why am I giving this talk? Well, obviously I'm doing a series, like I said, on, code reuse and keeping your code dry and a lot of different things like that. It's a great, it's a great series, and I'm trying to sort of do more software craftsmanship type stuff. And so I wanted to do that series. And part of it is because this seems to be a polarizing topic, especially in the CFML community, about code reuse and reinventing the wheel and everything. And if you listen to the haters, they say that third-party libraries are evil. And I'm here to say not all third-party libraries are, not all third-party libraries are not evil. That's a double. Okay, not all third-party libraries are evil. There you go. How about that? That's meant to be. I'll fix that later. But yeah, a lot of people also think that using third-party libraries make you lazy. They don't really make you lazy. They can actually make you more productive and more efficient. And again, in this here, it's like, I want to remind people it's the right third-party library, because not every third-party library is right for you. Okay, and then deciding when and which third-party library is important. That's like a big part of it, and that's what a big part of this talk will be, is how do you decide if a third-party library is the right one for you? And again, blindly using a third-party library might be as bad as what the haters say, because haters usually have a reason for hating something. So maybe they had a bad experience with something, and that's tainted their thoughts on all of this. So that's why I'm giving this talk. So hopefully you guys find some value out of it. We're sharing it to try and improve. And if you guys got some feedback, please let me know on Twitter. I'd be happy to take that into consideration. So what will this talk try to do? I'm going to really work hard on trying to give you a checklist of questions to help you identify the red flags. This is including but not limited to, looking at unsafe libraries or unreliable libraries or poorly supported libraries or ill-suited libraries, because those are the third-party libraries that you really don't want to include. Because if you have one of those reasons for a bad library, then that could actually, remove all the pros that you had before. So that's really what we want to try and do in this talk today. So let's look at some of the pros or benefits of using third-party libraries, and then we'll look at some cons. So the pros are, if you're using a library that is not a good fit, it may not have all these same benefits. Just remember that. And if you use a library that is not a good fit, it might have cons and disadvantages that do outweigh the pros. So again, we always have to evaluate pros and cons to everything and make the best decision you can. Okay, so probably the biggest and most important third-party library, the pros, saves time. And actually, I was in a Discord earlier today on the Working Code podcast, and someone said that 99% of all problems have already been solved, so don't reinvent the wheel. And that's basically true. Most problems have been solved, and so you have to sort of evaluate it. But if you use a third-party library, it lets you focus on your application's core business logic. It allows someone else to focus on their knowledge and expertise required to handle the other logic that's included in this library. So sometimes a library will help you do something really difficult, and it can take all that work away from you. Now, people argue, it's like, well, you still have to read the manual and you still have to integrate the library into your app. But that should be a tiny percentage in comparison to actually designing the module yourself or building the whole application piece yourself. So long story short, it should save you time. And again, for the right module. Everything I say is for the right module, for the right package, for the right library. Okay, so another pro of a third-party library is filling the expertise gap. Like we are as developers, we're proud of what we can learn. We're proud that we can handle things, we can learn things, we can do it. And I get that. I do the same all the time. And our T-shaped experience, we're very, very good at a lot of things, but we're usually experts in one thing. That's why we go deep on that T. So we're usually experts at one thing or a couple of things, being broadly capable of everything else. But with a T-shaped experience, hours of research that you might do, it'll never compete with the knowledge and expertise of those writing reputable third-party libraries. The people that are writing them are usually experts. So think about the thing that you are your biggest expert at, and then for that, that's really that's really the level of detail that someone else would go to. And a perfect example of this, it doesn't always have to be this crazy, but a cryptography library. There is seldom a good reason for you to write one of these. And there's a lot of other things that you could probably think of that you're like, there's no way I should write this. I'm just not the right person to write this. And so that's a really good pro for a third-party library. You can get a library that fills the expertise gap. It does something that you have no idea anything about. And yet you could learn it, but is it really worth it? The time that you could save by using something that an expert has built, and hopefully they've learned all the hard lessons too, so it's bulletproof. And again, just because you're writing code to wrap something, it doesn't mean that you're it's the same thing. So usually a wrapper to an existing library is a different scenario, and that's worth doing. So to be honest, you have to implement them anyway, so you kind of have to write a wrapper. Okay, so another pro for third-party libraries is modular code. Usually by using a package, you have to integrate with it. And by having that third-party library is essentially a little piece of modular code, it should help you basically create or encourage low coupling in your code. It's a good software design principle to have, low coupling, modular code, easy to test, all those different things. And so those are those aspects which, it sort of promotes. But by using third-party libraries, you're automatically using modular code. So good thing. Now, pre-tested code. Now, just so you know, doesn't mean they have tests, but a third-party library is used by other people, and their usage is one form of code testing, because most of you out there say you don't do enough user testing or testing in general. But I know you test your code. You go in there with a mouse and you click around and you're testing it. You're testing it manually, but you're still testing it. So these third-party libraries, but used by other people, they're using it, and that is a way to test this code. Okay. Another thing is users could have already found a lot of bugs in a well-built and well-used third-party library. Third-party libraries will usually have tests to catch edge cases and stop regressions. Not always, but a good one will. And so that means that your code automatically, by using a third-party library, is more testable and more tested and more battle-hardened than anything you write yourself. Now, question for all of you out there, does your code have that many users and that many tests? Probably not. So an example for this pre-tested code. So Quick and QB are two modules that Eric Peterson has built, and they have a ton. Literally a ton of tests. I think there's about 700 tests running in Quick every time you build something. And that ensures that these database queries work. So when you're using Quick and QB, Quick's an ORM, QB is like a query builder that makes you make queries even easier, more fluently. So they're great tools, and they work on lots of different databases. And all these tests run on all those different databases. So, that's something. If you're going to use something like an ORM, you could build your own. Yep. And a lot of people have, and we all kind of do. When you build your own little CRUD items and you reuse them, you're kind of building a little ORM. And Quick is great. It does a lot of good things, and it's super well tested. And a lot of people using it. It's running a lot of different applications everywhere. And you can go look at those modules on GitHub and see all the tests they have and see the tests they have to pass. So pre-tested code, there's some great examples right there. Okay, so another pro of third-party libraries is bug fixes and security updates. And this is a perfect example here. So you write your own, right? And just because you haven't found a bug or a security hole in it doesn't mean it isn't there. Now, everybody remember Log4j? Now, how long has Log4j been out there, and how many people have been using it? And they just found a bug in the version 1.8 stuff like this year, and everybody was crippled. That was a third-party library. So imagine if you wrote your library and you don't have that many users and not that many people using it, there may be some huge security holes that you don't even know about. So if there's huge security holes exist in something like Log4j, which is used by that many people, there's bound to be some pretty crazy stuff in yours. And you're not a Pete Freitag, right? You're not a security expert, not a Dan Epler. So I'm sure that there's some holes in your code. So there are definitely some bug fixes and security advantages, because what happened, they updated that, they patched that, they gave us options, they gave us all this stuff because it was a library, third-party library, and they helped fix it. And with a library, you benefit from more eyes on the code. Lots of other people using the library, finding and identifying those bugs and security issues. And again, with well-maintained projects, bugs should be fixed in a timely manner. And most importantly, it's not always fall back on you, because if it's not as well maintained, they might see something like that, and it's like, maybe they've moved on or something, that bug may sit there for a while. But usually in well-maintained third-party libraries, if there's a security issue, they'll jump on that. I mean, another example is the Adobe stuff, right? Adobe, when they have a vulnerability, they're quick to jump on that and release an update, security update. Some of those other hot fixes they have for non-security updates, they were still waiting for updates on those. What has it been? 9 months, 10 months, Charlie? It's been a long time. So security fix, they'll jump on it. Other stuff, maybe not so much. But that's just an example of third parties. So hopefully the security is at least handled first. Now, as I said, pros and cons. There's pros and cons to everything. And third-party libraries, sometimes they're not right. So there's always a con. And again, using a library that's not a good fit might not have all those benefits, may make them worse. And using a library that's not a good fit may have much bigger cons and disadvantages, and they'll outweigh any pro you have. So again, the right fit. So let's look at some of those. So cons, a dependency. So now your code is coupled to that library. So when you use a library, you integrate with it. When you do something, if they change their code, they change their library, you might need to change your code to match. Now, obviously it depends. The solution is to use a specific version and basically not update unless you need to. And that way, if something does change on their side and they have some security update and they push some, something that's not backwards compatible, you can stay on that other version until you're ready to change. And another option is to write an abstraction layer to handle changes behind the scenes when things change. And so that's a really big recommendation I hear from a lot of people, is if you're using a third-party library, try and use some type of abstraction layer if you can. Obviously, assuming that you're going to change at some point, but don't prematurely optimize and make it too much work. But if you write an abstraction layer, something in between, that way, if you do have to change libraries, maybe you can just change the library out in your abstraction layer, and that way you're not having to change it everywhere in your code. So that's some ways you can sort of fix that con there. But as that happens, they change their code, they update a library, or maybe they just go out of business. There's lots of different reasons that could be a con. Lack of support. Not all projects are built the same. Not all projects have the same resources. So not all third-party libraries have teams of people to maintain it, to document it, to fix bugs, or evangelize it, right? So sometimes the lack of support is, a big deal. So that is a con for some projects. So you need to be aware of that. Code responsibility. Now, this is a pretty big one, because if you include a third-party library, it means you're taking responsibility for that code in your application. So you may not know exactly how it works, but you are responsible for how it works. So, you got to know that. You got to make sure that you're aware of that. It's still a win in most cases, don't get me wrong. But if your application breaks, you have to fix it, whether it's in your code or on a library that you choose to use. You're the one that's responsible for making that work. Now remember, well-maintained libraries might fix bugs quickly. They might also require requests from the community to fix them. Sometimes those bugs may sit out there for quite a while, so you'll be responsible for patching your own code. So just be aware. Hopefully you're in a good library that does help that stuff, but sometimes you've got to do what you got to do. So until a fix is released, you might have to patch the issue yourself while you wait. The other thing is too, if you figure out how to do it, you figure out how to actually fix it, you can, submit that fix as a pull hour, and hopefully they have a good pull hour system, and then they can get that into the code. Obviously, assuming open source where you can see the code, but that way you can help the community and get that fixed. And then when they implement that fix, you have to make sure that you transition back to their version and ensure it works, and basically proceed where you left off. So you got to make sure you're ready to update when they update it. Okay, some more cons. So differences of opinions. This is a pretty controversial one, and this is maybe why some people got burnt on open source or third-party libraries. What somebody thinks is a bug, someone else might think is a feature. So some libraries have a piece of code that works one way, whereas you think it should work another way. You might think it's a bug or a problem, or like it's stupid, and they may think it's actually a feature. They might think it's an awesome thing, and like I know that we've had these issues with a few libraries ourselves. We think capturing errors and hiding them so no one can ever see the logs. That's a pretty big bug. You can't debug something you can't see, but some people might think it's a feature that it never throws an error. So there's stuff like that out there. Now remember, the cool thing about open source is that means that you own the source code, right? You own the ability to take it. But the thing is, in the end, the maintainer's vision for the library is what goes. So just because you can take the code down and do with it as you want under the right license, of course, the framework itself, the library itself, the maintainer's vision for the library is really what goes. So sometimes people get upset, right? They do all this work and create this pull request and send it into a open source library, and the open source maintainer will be like, you know what? That's just not the goal for the library. That's trying to make this this contact form into a CRM, right? It's not meant to do that. It's not supposed to do that. It's meant to do one thing and do one thing well, and I don't think that's a good fit for the library. So in the end of the day, the maintainer's vision for the library is what goes. But with this open source usually means you can always fork the library, right? So if you fork it and you develop it with your visions, then you can do that. Obviously, you get all the wins of having that code up to that point, but then once you fork, you lose a lot of those other benefits of using a third-party library. Obviously, you can try and merge some of them back in and everything, so just see how it goes. But funnily enough, with open source, sometimes your fork might become the way to do it. And if others agree with you, everyone can win, right? So there's quite a few things out there where, a maintainer let something slide for too long and someone forked it, and then that picked up. And, sometimes you're looking on NPM, for example, there's like 3 or 4 things that are all being forked from one, and they've all gone their separate ways. And, some of them got traction, and now that is the library to use. Okay, so we've seen the pros and cons, but really, how do we evaluate a third-party library? In the end, it's your code that you're installing this third-party library into, so you need to make the decision, right? So you need to ask yourself some questions and then make that decision. So you have to weigh out those benefits against the costs of using that library. And so I've come up with a list of questions, from my experience and reading lots of blog posts about this and over many years of failure and pain and suffering. So let's see what they are. So now these are not always red flags or determining factors. These are all just inputs that you need to consider. Okay, just laying that out. So how popular is the library? So if the library is popular, most of the pros are boosted. It's almost like a multiplication factor, right? So if it's really popular, it's going to have more eyes on it. It's probably going to have more support. It's going to have more maintainers. It's more extensive and a more active community. So those things basically make all the pros that we talked about even stronger, right? Now, just so you know, if you find a library that is new or unpopular, it doesn't make it a red flag. An unpopular library may still be a good library. Maybe it's an up-and-coming library, right? You don't know for sure. So just because it's small or not that popular right now, don't rule it out. But just be aware that if it is a popular library, it can have that multiplication factor of the pros. Okay, so is the library well recommended? This is probably the most important for me, is if a library is well used by the developer community, is basically a good indicator for using it. If people are word of mouth talking about it, we always say evangelizing, the developer reps or whatever are talking about it, but also users are talking about it. It's usually a good sign. And does the library have a community? If the library has a community, there's more people, there's more support that you can get, those types of things. That's really important. And are there many people recommending the library on Twitter, Stack Overflow, word of mouth? Those things are, important. And the main reason is because recommendations can be compelling. Finding other developers in the community to discuss the library with is really valuable, especially if you're evaluating it or integrating it or debugging it. So those things are really important. And then, of course, knowing there's developers that like the library is great, but do you know how to find them? So does the library have a home for its developers to communicate? Maybe forum, Slack, etc., stuff like that. Those are things to consider, right? Because if it's a really cool library, but there's not much of a community, or you don't know where to find the people that are using it, then that could be, not quite as a positive. So another thing is the library well written? Yeah, third-party libraries are great, but if you get one that's written like dog food, do you really want to use it? So, you want to look for something that, again, has that expertise gap filling. And so you want to look and say, is the code written with sound software design principles? Basically something that's engineered well enough, and hopefully will stand up to the test of time and everything, a lot of times I look for things like design patterns, thought out structure. Is it configurable? Because sometimes you get a module and it's great until you want to configure it to do something slightly different and there's no options to do it. Does it have a low coupling, or is it like deeply coupled for other things? Does it have a lot of dependencies and everything? Does it have consistent formatting and code comments? So if you actually did need to get in there at some point, you could get in there and figure it out. Is the README file included? Is it up to date? Is it detailed, or is it really, sparse? All that information ties in here. Are they tests? Are the tests up to date? Do they have good code coverage? Do they pass? And remember, tests are one of those things where having some tests is better than no tests. Doesn't mean they have to have everything tested, but if you're looking at a well-written library, these are the things that usually will stand out, and those things do make it more, more reputable. So another thing is the project alive and well maintained? Hint, I always recommend looking for a public issue tracker or documentation, because that's usually a really good sign if it's alive and well maintained. Are there a million things rotting, right? So just another thing though, a possible indicator, is that project releasing updates in a semi-regular fashion, or are they releasing it all? Have they released in a period of time? But note, just as I think Tim mentioned it on the Working Code podcast, boring or stable code can be a big positive, right? I think Adam Tuttle was talking about using make files, and Tim was using, talking about using old tools that never get updated because they're just that stable. They're rock solid, never need to be updated. Therefore, you don't have to worry about new versions coming out and breaking things or whatnot. They're battle tested and they're boring, but they work. So sometimes that can be a big positive, but not everything is like that. So if it's not like that and they're not getting updates, maybe they're just not well maintained anymore. So the other thing was mentioned, the issue tracker. Is it publicly available? Does it show activity? Do items and issues get resolved, or they just go there to die? Did they get closed after 2 weeks with no mention of why it was closed? They just get closed out for fun. So some public trackers have pretty bad reputation for stuff like that. And then, is the documentation up to date? Do they have different versions for the documentation in case you get stuck on an older version, or does everything get updated? Is their website up to date? If they have a forum or community, is there much traffic? Is it supportive? Does it have recent posts? Is it full of unanswered questions, or do they actually, people come back and include their solutions too? Because sometimes you'll find a solution somewhere else, but if they don't go back and update it, then it doesn't have the same value, because a place that has just a whole bunch of questions and no answers isn't as useful as you think. I have a couple of stories. I'll talk about some of this more at the end. So, how to evaluate a third-party library? Is the author or maintainer reliable? So after looking at the current library's code and life and maintenance, you might want to look into the author or core maintainers and see what else they've got, because obviously, it's probably not their first project. It's probably not their only project, right? So you may want to look in the author and see if they have a history of short-lived projects. That might be a red flag if they start a lot of things and then they just end them and just ditch them. So you may want to look and see if the author is consistent or whatnot. And is the maintainer still engaged in this project, or have they moved on and they're not really coming back to it? Because it might be a great project, but if it needs updates and security fixes, but that that maintainers changed languages or changed frameworks, or it was just a little hackathon they did and now they're gone. That's something to be really, really aware of and to take that into consideration. Okay, here's a big one, and this one I can't say enough. Is this library solving a problem worth solving? Now, this I think is really important because basically a lot of people, and I'll use an example from NPM. Sometimes they just install modules just to install modules. And, I love using modules in third-party libraries. Don't get me wrong. I like trying to not reinvent the wheel. But something as simple as leftpad brought down the entire internet because everybody was installing a module that really was so simple. It wasn't a problem worth solving. I don't really think it was worth killing the internet for a leftpad. But, maybe that's a polarized opinion. I don't know. What do you guys think? Tell me in the chat. Was leftpad something you would install? It's kind of crazy, I think. Okay. Anyway, back to this. So is this library solving a problem that my language or framework already handles? Sometimes people forget that their language, their frameworks, they already have a bunch of helpers, they have a bunch of functions, and you can't know them all. I've been using ColdFusion for 22, 23 years now, and I go to CF Talks all the time, looking for functions that I didn't know existed or maybe are new. Charlie does these talks all the time about its hidden gems, about all these things you didn't even know it could do. And so sometimes, doing that little bit of research is great. I think it would be really good. Now, can I easily manage most of this? Sometimes the problem is a problem we're solving, but maybe it's not that hard and it's easily handled by you. And sometimes I've seen people spend more code writing the implementation of a module than just writing the module themselves. So you need to think about that and can you manage it? Is it worth doing it? Is it solving a problem we're solving? Now, like I said, sometimes a lot more code basically used compared to a simple convenience helper, and it may not be worth it. And the other thing is, if it's not using any special knowledge or expertise to perform the function, then it may not be actually adding that much value to you. It's one of those things where you really got to evaluate it. And again, I've been listening to a lot of the Working Code podcast lately, catching up on old episodes, and they talked about it here too. If it's something pretty simple or small, you can write it yourself and you get the benefit of including your repo and having all that knowledge around it and everything. And it's not some third-party black box that people are scared to look at or think about or know what it's doing. But here's an example that you might think is pretty simple. So get your IP address, right? So get real IP. I think I mentioned this in a couple of talks, three talks ago. Anyway, a while ago. But you see, get real IP is a function that we have in ColdBox and a couple other things, whatever. But you're like, wait a minute, my engine can do that, right? CFML can get you the remote IP address of that user. Yeah. CGI.remote address or remote ADDR. That will get you the remote IP. Now, there's a problem though, right? Because that's a simple use case. But not all the time is your app or your framework like ColdBox. It runs in lots of different environments and lots of different platforms and lots of different setups. That code may not work. It might give you the wrong IP address because sometimes you're using different routers, using web servers, using proxies. And so there's all these different things you need to do to get an IP address depending on the setup you're in, the environment you're in. So getting that real IP is a lot trickier. And actually, this is one thing I noticed, and I had it in the presentation before, that we have get real IP and a couple of other functions like that we updated. And someone said, oh, they changed this this protocol for proxies from this type of reverse proxy setup, and you're supposed to get the first part of the IP if there's a list of IPs for this, but you meant to get the last one if it's this format. Depending on this header, it does this, and this header, you do that. And we had to update it in several projects all at once because we weren't using a shared library. We were had the code repeated, and the main reason it was repeated is because that was a core part of the way that ColdBox booted up. It needed some information, but that meant we had to change it in lots of different places. And so that expertise that somebody else had to share and update that package, if someone was using a third-party library for get real IP, and people were adding all the new protocols and new headers as they came out for new conventions and new tools, then you'd gain from that. Okay, and then Yeah, and Charlie's got a post in there, so I'll let you guys read that. So actually, I'll just say it now. So he knows that my focus is the shared library concern, but for helping solving challenges with getting the real IP, he's got a blog post there about, get CF no uses real IP behind proxy load balancing caching solutions, etc. Yeah. So yeah, I'll have to look, Charlie, and see if that's got all the new stuff that we've put in there or not, or maybe we got to add more to it. Okay. So in this case, a library can handle those use cases. If something changes, the library can be updated, and then that update, if you're set up to make those updates easy, and we'll talk about that later, but if that updating that is easy, then you can improve your code pretty easily without needing to learn more about proxy header changes. You don't have to be looking at blog posts for something as simple as IP addresses, right? Because you could do it, you could figure it out, but that's not something that you're just on the prowl for, right? We don't and can't and won't know everything about everything. So you can try and stay up to date on all that, but isn't it nice to have somebody else's expertise? Charlie's saying his post may be lacking new info rather than my code. No, Charlie, somebody probably read your blog post actually, and then updated ColdBox and a couple other modules that we use in the same code. But it's all good. The thing is, when not everyone's up to date. Things change all the time. Technology changes a lot, and the thing is, sometimes this stuff is outside your realm of expertise, right? And so sometimes a third-party library makes sense. Okay. So we talked about, is this library solving a problem we're solving? Well, what about, is it solving my problem? Or is it trying to solve everybody's problem? Because suppose you only need a small percentage of a library, right? 5% of it, 10% of it. Is it worth installing an entire library just to get that little piece? Or what if the library only solves a piece of your requirements? And maybe, you want to build something and, you need a Kanban board or something, but you're building a ticketing system. And so the Kanban board is just a little tiny piece of it. Is it worth using? That's something you have to ask yourself. And the other thing is, if you have to change the library or roll some of your own code in addition to what the library is solving, that makes a big difference too. So, maybe you go to evolve it like this is an MVP, and that library works great for your MVP. But as you roll out all those new features, you're going to have to change it. You might have to add to the library, or maybe you'll have to replace it. So you need to figure out, is it worth that short-term win? And then you can switch to another one later, or you could write your own. Sometimes just getting something out the door is better than having nothing out the door, right? Perfect is the enemy of complete. Sometimes using a third-party library, get something out there and then get feedback and then build from there is what you need. But sometimes it's not. So you need to make sure it's solving the right problem. Okay, security risk. Is this using this library going to be a security risk? Open source software usually has more security pros than cons, but because it is open, it can be a target for hackers. Your code may have bigger holes, but maybe less well known. So yeah, you might be, Johnny Hacker, and he's looking at my website or your website. And if your website is written in WordPress, they can get a script kiddie, right? That has a million things set up for attacking a WordPress site. And if you're 2 versions behind, or you don't have the right best practices set up, it'd be pretty easy for them to take down your entire system. Now, then again, my website, if I did it, it's not WordPress. I'm running ColdFusion. Haha, no one knows about ColdFusion. There still might be some huge holes, but it might be a little harder to find. But if they do find them, then I've got to figure out how to fix them, right? So always, again, look at those types of things. Check and see if that library has known issues. Check and see if there's like chatter about known hacks or script kiddies or any of those other things out there. Do they release timely updates? Do they have information out there? Usually, like you said, people like Adobe and other big sources out there, if a project is well maintained, they should jump on security issues quickly. So if you have security issues that are sitting in that public bug tracker we talked about, and they're sitting there for a long, long time, that could be a huge red flag, right? You don't want to use a library that's a huge security risk. Another thing to consider is their security model. So I've been doing a lot more of this sort of cybersecurity learning lately and everything else, talking about bad actors and stuff. But one of the ways that libraries become a risk actually is depending on their security model. So do they have a pretty open commit right? structured pull request system, or if you basically make 2 pull requests, they just give you open commit rights. Because if they don't, if they have a system that make sure senior members have to verify them, and you have to basically work in the project for a long time before you get full commit rights and everything. If you do all that properly, if they have good policies and security models in there, this should help minimize the risk of a bad actor committing potentially malicious code to a reputable library, because that is a really big attack vector these days. People basically get, they might find a library that's pretty well used, that's pretty flexible and doesn't have too much pull request authority, and so someone will commit some couple little documentation things or whatever. They get given permission to make pull requests and actually commit them, and then they go shove a bunch of malicious code deep in there somewhere that somebody might not notice, and all of a sudden you're using this library with this new update, and it just rolls out this new update, and all of a sudden you have all this malicious code in there because a bad actor got in and did some stuff he shouldn't. So that's definitely something you should be considering. What's their security model look like? And then another one here is third-party libraries. What license do they have? A third-party library license can control how you use the library and how your app has to be licensed if you use the library. I'm not an expert. I'm going to open this link up here, though, in another page and show you a little bit on it, because there's a lot of stuff about licenses. Brad's done a couple of talks on them. Brad Wood has done it on it before, but this is a pretty good blog post, I thought. Talking about what is an open source license, copyleft and permission, sort of the cheat sheet as well. So you'll see some of these: GNU, the Apache license, Microsoft licenses, BSD, CDDL. There's all these ones here. Eclipse, MIT is pretty common as well. So I highly recommend you learn a little bit more about that too, because sometimes if you actually add a bit of third-party library code to your app, maybe you've got a private repo and a private closed source product, but you added a third-party library of a certain type. Some of those require, if you want to use their library, you have to basically open source your code. So even if you have a closed source product, if you use a certain type of license that is open source, it requires your entire app to be open source too. And if not, you're violating the license. So, be aware and check that out. Okay, so I see red flags everywhere. So obviously there's a lot of things to think about. It's pretty overwhelming, but let's summarize the questions and have a look here. And then we'll take a look at a couple of things in ColdFusion and see how they rank up with some of this stuff here. So remember, we talked about how popular is the library? Is the library well recommended? Is the library written well? Is the project alive and well maintained? Is the author and maintainer reliable? Is the library solving a problem we're solving? Is the library solving my problem or everyone's problem? Is it using this library a security risk? And what type of license does the library have? So those are sort of the questions you want to run through, right? So we've gone through them all. Let's look at using them to basically evaluate some software in the ColdFusion space. So let's think back. Let's think big scale where everyone can relate. So back in the old days, right? Before jQuery and everything else was good and everything, things were out there. ColdFusion made the hard things easy, right? So some of the stuff that we used back in the day, like Ajax, the Ajax proxy inside of ColdFusion. So it's a library. It's inside our engine, but still a library. So how popular was the library? It was pretty good. Is the library well recommended? I mean, Adobe loved it. A lot of people thought it was pretty easy to use and everything. Was it well written? Yeah, it worked pretty well. Didn't do a whole lot of diving into it, but yep. Was the project alive and well maintained? Well, Adobe just released it. You assume it is. Was the author reliable? Adobe, yeah, they were pretty well back. Might have been Macromedia back then, actually. Is the library solving a problem we're solving? Ajax back in those times was really hard. So yes, it was solving a great problem. It's a library solving my problem or everyone's problem. Well, it's solving my problem. I mean, it did have a couple of configuration options, but it worked great for me. Was it a security risk? I don't think so. What type of license? Well, we had the license bundled with ColdFusion. We bought it, so that was good. So, the Ajax tool was pretty good. Now, what happens 5 or 10 years later? A lot of those libraries that ColdFusion included never got updated. So when you ask those questions a few years later, is that project alive and well maintained? Nope. Some of those things like the charting and everything hadn't been updated for years. And so some of those things change over time. Is the author maintainer reliable? Well, they're great at releasing some of those things, but they didn't update them. So that's the sort of things. So even when you ask that question at a certain point, you might have to reevaluate them as well. So that's something to be aware of and to think about. So let's try with another example. Bcrypt. Bcrypt, how popular is the library? It's really, really popular for passwords, right? Using Bcrypt. Is it well recommended? Yes. Is it well written? Absolutely. Is the project alive and well maintained? I think so. To be honest, I haven't done a lot of detail into diving into that. It's probably more of the boring, stable, but really, really stable software. Is the author maintainer reliable? Yeah, they did a lot of great work. It's really one of the libraries to use. So is it solving a problem we're solving? Absolutely. And the expertise required to build my own like Bcrypt equivalent is ridiculous. So yes, it's definitely worth solving. Is it solving my problem? Everyone's problem? Everyone's problem is the same. In this case, it's solving it well and not doing too much. It's using this library as security risk. Not using this library as a security risk, right? And so what type of license does that library have? I don't even remember. So overall, though, Bcrypt, amazing. Should be using it. If you're not using it, you probably should be. Perfect. Then, so we want to try and use this for other things. So these are sort of the questions I actually asked way back in 2013, before any of you really knew me. And I was a ColdFusion developer, worked for a couple of companies. We built our own CMS. We built our own CMS tool. We basically took Fusebox 3. When they went back to XML, I said, no way in hell am I doing that. And so in 2002 or whenever it was, I basically took their framework and I modified it and made it my version and built on top of it. So I had a framework, but it was a customized framework. So I've been building that for years, and we wanted to build our team, we wanted to grow our company, and we got to the point where it's like, you know what, we built our own CMS on top of our own modified framework. Like, it's harder to get people, it's harder to find people, it's gonna be harder to train people. So we were wanting to look at frameworks. So we were basically, my job was to evaluate the frameworks out there and figure out which framework we wanted to use. And at the time, Mach 2 and Model Glue and all those other ones were all dead, pretty much dead. But really, ColdBox, Framework 1, and CF Wheels were the three big ones right there. So I basically went through this process. I looked at all these three libraries to figure out which framework I should tell my company we needed to focus on for us to be able to grow the company in the best way moving forward. So started with CF Wheels. So how popular was the library? It was okay. It was based on Ruby on Rails and everything. So it had some popularity. Was it well recommended? This is actually one of the reasons I didn't jump on it, to be honest, is because when I went and looked for recommendations, and again, to be honest, right now, all the frameworks are great. This is from previous experience. Things have changed, so don't hate me for saying these things. It's perfect evaluation. So when I went in there, I was looking for seeing how well recommended it was. So I went and found the community, and they had a forum for it. So I was like, cool, let me go to CF Wheels forum, and they were fairly active. I had a few people in there doing some stuff or whatever. And so I went in and said, hey, I'm looking at 3 frameworks, and I'm trying to figure out which one's the best one. You guys are CF Wheels users, you're in the community, so you must love it. So convince me why I should use your framework. And all I got was basically some snotty remarks like, we shouldn't have to defend our framework in our own community, and that just put me off. I'm like, they might like it, but it didn't seem like a supportive sharing community. And so for me, that was one of the things that turned me off. And again, that might have been 1 or 2 people that not even with the framework anymore, and Peter and Tom have done great things with the framework. So I'm not trying to bash CF Wheels. It's a great project, but at the time it didn't look like what it needed. Was it well written? I actually thought it was really well written. Was the project alive and well maintained? It had a good website, lots of great videos. Chris Peters had done all these videos, and it was really good. Like, it was, to me at first, it was the one I was leaning towards. I thought it was really great. And then I realized the website hadn't been updated for 2 years. And then I realized the videos are all 2 years old. And so I was like, is the author and maintainer reliable? Chris Peters, great, did lots of good work. He went to Ruby on Rails in 2012 or 2011 or something. So basically, right after he left, it was kind of stagnant for quite a while. And again, Peter Mary and Tom King, they picked it up, I think, in 2018 and done huge improvements. It's come back alive. It's great. So, but when I evaluated these things, those are the things that I ran into, and it didn't have a lot of, had some documentation, but some was out of date. It wasn't getting many updates or bug fixes or security fixes because they lost their core maintainers, so there was a lot of things that just said, it's not the one for me. Then I looked at, Framework One. So Framework One, how popular is the library? Really, really popular, right? Is the library well recommended? Yeah, people love Framework One. They still do. They did, and they still do. Is the library well written? Sean Caulfield wrote it. He did a great job. It's really well written, nice. It does exactly what it means to do. That's good. Is the project alive and well maintained? Back then, yeah, it was doing pretty well. There was regular updates. There was a lot of things were going on and everything. Is the author and maintainer reliable? Sean Caulfield, great person, great coder, great designer. I mean, he's been around a long time. But right when we got there, he just moved to Clojure, right? He just started Clojure. His company was still using ColdBox, actually, even though he wrote Framework One. It was using ColdBox. He wrote Framework One. And he was using it on some other projects and everything, but he was moving to Clojure, and so he was moving away from ColdFusion. And so I was like, okay, little red flag. I talked to him a lot. He gave me really honest feedback on Framework One and ColdBox because he used them both, and so he gave me a lot of really detailed information. It was really good. Was the library solving a problem that we're solving? It was a framework. It did MVC, did it pretty well. Had some DI, dependency injection, everything. So yeah, it was a problem worth solving. Did it solve my problem, everyone's problem? I mean, for the most part, it did. But to be honest, it didn't have all of the things that I wanted it to do. It didn't have all the modules, didn't have the modularity, didn't have all those extra features. But what it did really well, and it got out of the way so you could do what you want. That's why a lot of people like Framework One, because it gives them what they need, but gets the hell out of the way so they can do what they want. Adam Cameron will agree with me on that. That's why he'd use Framework One over ColdBox any day. Was he using this framework as security risk? No, it was actually pretty good and had the right type of license. So Framework One, pretty big positive at the time. Again, CF Wheels now is much better. Don't hate me. And then I looked at ColdBox. So how popular was the library? Well, the library was pretty popular, but not as popular as Framework One. But it was still really well recommended from those who used it. Those who used it loved it. Just like Framework One and CF Wheels. It had a community, a pretty good community. I really liked it. Was it well written? It was well written. I really liked all the design patterns and everything. It was well architected. It was, they used providers and factories and all sorts of different things in there. So, and I really liked the way it was written. I really connected with that. And was the project alive and well maintained? It was. I mean, at first, when I first, found ColdBox, it was Otis was known for documentation. Right after that, they started building tools and other stuff too, and changed their name. But at first, it was huge on documentation. They had, lots of trainings, and they did webinars, and they had workshops. You could get paid support, which is something Framework One didn't have, right? Otis had paid support. You could, get consultants. You could have, team editions. There was tons of stuff that they could do. So it was really active, really well maintained. And the author and maintainer, were they reliable? Otis Solutions had proved that they were, a strong company in the area doing, open source projects, and they were supporting them. And apart from the April Fool's joke every once in a while, we told people we're going to Groovy, there's no chance of Otis going anywhere. So was the library solving a problem worth solving? Yeah, it had, just like Framework One, it had the MVC and it had DI injection and it had, conventions and everything. But it also had a ton of other modules and add-ons and, all these other things that had already been solved. It was already in there. And was this library solving my problem or everyone's problem? I think it was solving my problem, but it also was very configurable because it had all these conventions, but you can configure ColdBox to do anything you want, basically, or however you want as well. And so basically everything in there I needed, but I will admit there's probably a little bit of bloat. In the old days, someone said, they called ColdBox the kitchen sink. And at the time, it was maybe a little bit of a concern, but obviously since then they've modularized, just like Adobe CF now. You can just install the pieces you want. ColdBox is the same way. You install the pieces you want and add on the other pieces and you're good to go. So, but at the time, again, it was a little bit not sure about that. Now, I was using that library security risk. I really think that ColdBox was probably, more secure, although it had more code, so there's more chance of risk than, say, Framework 1, which was less code. But there was a lot of people using it, and they're doing a lot of work with government clients that have higher, stricter security options. So I think it was pretty secure. And the licenses were, very open source friendly. That's what they are in a professional open source company. So in the end, I had a 3-day boot camp that I booked with Water Solutions so I could go learn it. And, me and my boss went, we did a 3-day workshop, then we went to CF Objective and we had 3 days there. And I came back, just pumped up, inspired, ready to go. And so that was the main reason I chose that over Framework 1. Like Sean was kind of on the way out. They didn't have paid support for us. They didn't have quite as much documentation and didn't do quite as much, where Otis had all those other things. But I basically went through this list. So, I think these are the type of questions you need to ask yourself when looking at libraries, and not just big frameworks too, little things like bcrypt and other things as well. And so you guys are all thinking, oh my God, will you ever shut up? And that sounds like a lot of work. You're right. To make the right decision, it can be a lot of work. But think about it. If you're reinventing the wheel for a non-trivial problem, that is a lot of work. So if you pick the first package you find, it could be a lot of work to fix it, replace it, or getting it working at all. So sometimes it's worth that maybe a day of research, right? A day of Googling and research to find which package is the right one if you're going to use one at all. Because maybe you find out there are no packages that meet your situation, your solution. And so maybe you need to, do that little bit of research. But if you spend a day to save 20, that sounds like a worthwhile experiment, right? It sounds like a worthwhile investment. And again, mentioning Working Code podcast, I know, but hey, I'm not on that podcast. I'm just promoting it. Carol talked about when she rolled out their new system, she spent 2 days Googling stuff just to basically see what people had done, basically trying to read from Google and automating stuff with a ton of AWS stuff. But she spent a couple of days Googling, and that was part of her workflow. The company, no research is worth it. And so then they found all the right tools, wired them all together, and they came up with a great solution. And so sometimes it's really worth doing it. It is a lot of work, but if you do it wrong or reinvent the wheel, that's a lot of work too. So if Charlie's okay with it, the next session I want to talk about is like, where do you find, install, update, and implement third-party libraries in ColdFusion? So this one's sort of more about different places you can get them, like if you want to use Java, do you go to Maven or do you go somewhere else, and stuff like that. So I really want to tie in. I wanted to do more of that in the session, but obviously I talked too much. Didn't have enough time for everything there. So the next one, sort of finding more about finding them, installing them, updating them, and implementing them. And we'll have code next time, I promise. So any questions, anybody?
While we wait for those questions, in case you weren't seeing it, the answer to your last comment was, yeah, absolutely.
Motion
Happy to have you
detected at
back.
your front door.
And also, if you see the previous comment, after you laid out all that scenario of how you ending up in ColdBox rather than Framework 1, I said, and imagine how different the world would be for us and for you if not for all that happening. So it just goes to show sometimes even struggles which seem painful in the moment could lead you down a different path that leads you, and as in this case, for you having a whole new world of opportunity with Ortus, and for us to benefit from your having gone down that road.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, and the funny thing is that I went through those 3 days boot camp and then those 3 days at CF Objective and came out pumped up and inspired and everything else. And my boss was like brain melted, right? So he went back, and the funny thing is, he's like, he just didn't click. For him, it
Right.
didn't click the way he learned
Common.
and everything. And the funny thing is about 2018, he went and checked out CF Wheels. Tom King took over, and now he's using CF Wheels. So
Isn't
I
that
left
funny?
obviously just a couple years before that, and joined Otis in 2015. Basically full time, and I still work with my old boss and everything. But it's just funny because it didn't click for him, and that was the learning style. And the cold box workshops we do now, I built them because he struggled with. Luis is very theory, and so the boot camp we went to was a lot of theory and then some hands-on. But me and Eric, we built the Cold Box Zero to Here, where basically, let's build something, and I'll explain why we're doing what we're doing as we do it. And for me, I learned better that way. I can handle the theory too, so that's why it did click. But for a lot of people, they like to build stuff and then teach them as they build, and they'll retain it and learn it. And so, anyways, that's just something that sort of interesting. That after all those years, he went back to CF Wheels, and I'm spouting off about Cold Box everywhere. But like I said, they're great frameworks. They all got their pros. They all got their cons. Again, same thing, right? Pros and cons to everything. Same with these frameworks. So,
and let me repeat that point you made earlier in case anybody kind of missed it. That Gavin commented about how the CF Wheels community has had some recent revitalization. At least it seems, from the outside to be recent revitalization with Peter and Mary and other folks doing lots to bolster it. So as he said, he's not knocking it. They're just different from each other, and each should decide for themselves what makes sense for them. But it was just his experience back with that earlier, iteration of things.
yeah.
And it just goes to show that things can change. And, it's kind of like, say CF as well. There are some people that left CF a long time ago and either went to another platform entirely or went to another engine, and they've stopped paying attention to CF. And in their minds, it's like CF is what they remember it to be, which may have been several years ago. And they may have been using it in a way that they've been using it for several years. So their image may be literally 14 years old, and they're not aware of how much things have changed. So it also goes to show how, one should really give chance for something to be reconsidered. If they haven't looked at it in a long time, it might have changed quite a bit.
And to be honest, maybe my comment was way ruder than it comes off. Sometimes I rub people the wrong way, so it's possible. I think I'm pretty nice and whatever, but I guess I wrote that comment, but I got some pretty bad kickback about I was just like, convince me, you're like the ultimate evangelist. You guys are using it, you love it. Convince me to use your framework, and they took it the wrong way for sure.
Well, and I'm sure you guys occasionally have people that raise some concern about Full Box or Command Box or any of the box products, and they might. And you made the point, which is a good point, is that different people have different, styles or different backgrounds from which they're coming to the thing. And they may look at what even you guys have and go, I don't get it. I still don't get it. Like I've seen the classes, or I maybe taken the classes, or I've read the docs, or I've watched the CF casts. And some people perhaps listening right now might themselves still struggle to pick a framework, because they've looked at whatever the current ones that are left. So anyway, let's not go too far down that rabbit hole.
Yeah,
because your point is more about reuse of libraries in general. But it does make the point that sometimes, and I just want to say this for the defense of some people that may not want to say anything, because no one has said anything, is that there are, trust me, because I see them every day, there are a lot of people who still have no framework, and they just either can't decide because it's not their job to decide, or they're afraid to even contemplate the prospect of moving to a framework. And I bring all this up to say they miss out on a lot of this reusability, which is the focus of the talk here. They literally miss out on it because they're not leveraging some framework that provides this potential raft of opportunity. And that someday would be a cool thing for somebody to do a talk that maybe just looks at a high level of what do you get by running your app under, let's say, ColdBox, or under, let's say, CF Wheels or Framework One, or there's other platforms out there that might, to some people's minds, seem to be CRMs, but they're really frameworks in which, or sorry, CMSs, and they're really frameworks in which one can build an app. And some people just can't keep up with all of the options that are out there. Having
I can't. I mean, would
be helpful.
Yeah, actually, one of the things on my to-do list at some point is to build, a simple app and ColdBox and Framework One and CF Wheels and compare, and that will help me learn a little bit more about them, because I haven't touched CF Wheels forever, and Framework One I've done a little bit with here and there, but I haven't done much for a long time. So I'm like,
and I'll just throw out that could be a cool thing to have as like a GitHub project that others could contribute to say, here's some small sample code base. Let's show implementing it.
Yep. As long as it's not a to-do app, then I'm okay with it.
Right. That's always
it's like it's too simple. I'm like,
right.
I always like
WebSocket demo as a chat thing. Like, come on, we can do better than that.
I like Twitter clones and stuff like that, where everyone still understands it, but yeah. So, but anyway,
nobody's got any comments or questions or follow up.
And so, if Charlie lets me do the June 23rd one, I have another one. Hopefully, we can probably do like July 7th. So, I want to show people how I'm planning and building my developer feud quiz API, because at Adobe Developer Week, I'm going to be doing one on basically building the front-end Vue.js piece of the developer feud quiz game. And so I want to build the API on the online CF Meetup group. So that's what I'm hoping to do. So again, I'm putting the dates in here because we got to obviously clarify with Charlie and make sure that everything works and make sure some of vacations don't interfere and everything else. But I'm trying to space them out every couple of weeks. So,
And thanks everybody for your little comments there. Kind regards for both of us. Thank you very much. And especially Gavin for your coming on now and for offering to do it again. And I'm perfectly happy to have you every couple of weeks. And I've got some I want to do. We could slip them in. And let me repeat, as I said in the chat, if you missed it, anybody's welcome to present. And I offered there the link. It's speak.coldfusionmeetup.com. So if anybody is always interested, I talked about how if you have a talk that you gave at another event and you want to update it or just reprise it or record it, that's a benefit. Or if you're going to be doing it at an upcoming event, you can regard this as your warm-up. Or if you have a topic that you've never given and don't plan to give at any event, but you think CF people would enjoy it, that's what we're here for. So we'd welcome having it. And so Mark, you mentioned that. Yep. Right. And I said that too. And that was going to be my very next point. I said in the chat earlier, all the sessions are recorded. You can find them at recordings.coldfusionmeetup.com. And in fact, since you're here on the session, as soon as we're done and we end the broadcast, the recording will be there in YouTube. And you guys that are watching this, you've got that YouTube link. And then I'll go and update the recordings page to point that out. So, as soon as we're done, you can go back and watch it, Mark. Let me just say for anybody that, you or anybody listening or future people, one thing I've noticed is that even though YouTube makes the recording available as soon as we're done, the chat that we had here is not immediately available. And I think that's because of StreamYard. That's the service we use. Although now that I think about it, no, because you guys are seeing the chat in real time.
You might need to log in and get into the settings, because there's a settings that sometimes it'll automatically have everything available right away, or it'll have it where it plays back in time sequence, and there's other ones where it hides it. And so, there's a bunch of different settings. It's kind of
in YouTube
or YouTube.
Okay, cool. So in the YouTube, because this gets created as a YouTube thing. You're saying in my YouTube
in the YouTube
channel.
studio, in the YouTube studio.
Yeah, I hadn't seen that, so I'll look into that. But so just be aware for now. If you go look at the recording right away, you don't see the chat, but you will shortly. I haven't been able to figure out when it is, but maybe I'll find out in there. Maybe it's set to like 10 minutes. Maybe it's to give the person time to review the chat to make sure there was nothing they didn't want publicized. But
possibly
that's never a problem for us. So thank you for that. I'll look into it, and we'll get your next session announced very soon. And anybody else who might want to give a talk. And Mark, wink, wink, nod, nod. Mark Takata, for those who don't know, he's the ColdFusion evangelist, developer relations, whatever you want to call him, regard him as. He's our connection to the CF team from the CF community. And he does a lot of talks, and he does them in different venues. Mark, we haven't had you yet here. Be happy to have you do either one you've already done, or again, one that you might do in the future if you want to warm it up here. Because this is a different audience. It's, usually about 30, 40 people. It is recorded, so of course everybody would see it. And I know some people don't want to they don't want to ruin the future topic, event, session, conference, whatever, by presenting it early. But if anybody does, I'm happy to have you, and we'd look forward to it. There you go, Mark, and Dan too. I wasn't gonna, call you out, but since you made your comment there, I know Dan, you've got topics you could offer. And
yeah, for sure. And that's the thing. If you guys have more people from the community doing it, then you won't have to listen to me as much.
That's right. Right. I didn't want it to be the Charlie show. Now it's the Gavin show, but that's okay. It could be the Charlie and Gavin show.
Like I said, I just want to share, I like sharing this information and getting it out there and stuff. And, there's a lot of stuff that I can share that doesn't mean you have to be a ColdBox person. Like all this stuff is useful for all developers in the CFML community. So
no, and it doesn't have to be new stuff either. Let that be a lesson. I mean, Gavin's sharing things that are generic and even reflecting on things, how they've changed over time for him or the projects he's working with. So if any of you guys, if you have something that maybe came out with CF11 and you want to show people how to use it, don't presume that everybody now knows about it and already uses it. No, trust me, because I'm telling people all the time about things that are years old and they don't know about it. So any topics are welcome. Anything. Don't hesitate. Love to have you.
For sure. We want to get this back up and running like it used to be. I mean, it used to be every week there was tons and tons of people. It was great. And
sometimes it was more than one a week. Exactly.
Yeah, there was. But so
more than one a day. There was at least a couple days over the years. And again, we were on number 296. So yes, we've had, nearly 300 sessions over the past 16 years. So we'd look forward to having more. Absolutely. And then Scott said, and Scott, by the way, you're another one. I know you've got some topics you could present. Just last night, I had someone reach out to use one of my libraries. And there you go. I wanted to extend the functionality, right? Because Scott creates a lot of great stuff. So we appreciate everybody that's involved in the community. Even if you just do what you do and don't present, that's cool. But I'm just saying, we'd love to have anybody present on any topic that's at all related to CF. You're welcome. We'd be great to have you. So we'll let you go. Thank you very much, Gavin.
Yeah, thank you, Charlie.
Next time. All
okay.
right, y'all.
Have a good one.
Oh, actually, before we leave, did you have anything else you'd wanted to say in closing?
I was going to throw the slides up. I'll get those to you as soon as I can. And I think I gave you all the ones for the last one. If not,
well, we don't really have any place to store them.
In the YouTube, though, you can put them in the description.
Well, if you have are you saying you would have a link?
Yeah, I'll give you a Google Drive link.
Yeah, cool. Sure. I'd be happy to put that in there. I'd have to edit it afterwards, but yeah, feel free to send it and I'll be happy to put it in there. All right, y'all. Until the next time.
Have a good one, everyone.
Yeah, see you guys. Bye.